Good day to all of you. We're going to talk a little bit today about tenons and recesses and chucks, because you can have the best tenon ever turned, but if it does not fit well into the chuck, you're still likely to have it come off if you get a catch. So it's a combination of both. Your tenon and your recess has to match your chuck exactly. And to be perfectly honest, there are some chucks that are prone to have a piece pull out because they were poorly designed in the first place. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But we're going to get into it. We're going to talk a little bit about recesses and chucks and tenons. And then the thing you have to understand is everything I'm going to say here is simply my opinion. And most of us know that if you get 10 turners in a room and you ask all of them the same question, you'll get 15 different answers. It's just the nature. There's lots of different ways to do a thing. And one is not necessarily better than the other. If they both achieve the desired results and they're safe, then they're good methods. All I'm going to be able to do today is to show you how I do it. And we'll get to that in just a second. Okay, the first thing we're going to talk about is going to be a tenon. Now, I've already turned one on this bowl blank. And a tenon is nothing but a protrusion that's going to fit inside the chuck. A recess is just that. It's a depression cut into the bowl blank that's going to fit over the chuck, not inside it. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But a good tenon is usually about 3/8 of an inch deep, and it needs to conform to the chuck. Now, the chuck that I use I'm not endorsing it. It's just that's the one that I started with. I liked it and I've stuck with them. It's the one-way Talon. It's a smaller chuck. They make a larger version. But I find this holds anything I want to turn. Now, the important thing about cutting the tenon is you must cut your tenon to match your chuck. And all chucks are not the same. Mine happens to have ridges on the inside, and they're square cut. There's no angle on the inside of my chuck, but it has these ridges that can bite into the wood and hold it securely. So when I make a tenon to match this chuck, I cut the side straight. Now, there's some chucks that have a dovetail cut on the inside. So if you have a chuck that has a dovetail, then it's to your advantage to cut a dovetail on your tenon that matches the dovetail in your chuck. You have to make the tenon mate properly to the chuck you're going to use. So for me, it's just cut straight. Now, it's also fairly small. Now, you want your tenon to be as small as possible. The chuck has its strongest grip at its smallest diameter. So you need to cut your tenons on the small side. You close your chuck all the way up, measure across it, and make your tenon slightly larger. The size of the tenon, a larger tenon does not give you greater holding power. It's how that tenon matches with the chuck. And all chucks have their strongest holding power at or near their smallest diameter. The larger I increase that, and it'll get quite large. But if I were to make a tenon this big around, it would not hold as securely as it does when it's smaller. So make your tenons at or near your smallest diameter, and you'll have a stronger hold. So if you want your pieces to stay on the chuck while you're turning, then that's the general rule. Make the tenon match your chuck. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about this. Another thing I'd like to mention too is you never want the bottom of your recess to touch the bottom of your chuck. You want your the surface to hit the face of the jaws, not the bottom of the jaws. If you want it to hold and hold securely, then most chucks have a depth of about 1/2 inch. So I make my tenons about 3/8, so that when it goes on, I don't have to worry about it hitting the bottom. All 4 chuck jaws are against the side of my bowl blank. They're not touching the bottom of my chuck well. So you want your contact surface to be with the face of the jaws. So you would make your tenon to match. Everything you do on the tenon has to match the chuck you're going to hold it in. I don't know any simpler way to put that. And if you do that, you're going to find that your work pieces stay on your chuck better. And they can withstand a bigger catch before they come off. If you abuse a piece of wood on a lathe, if you put too much pressure, or if you get a really ugly catch that puts a great deal of lateral pressure on your blank, it can still pull out of a chuck. The best way to avoid having a piece come off your chuck is to turn in such a way that you don't get catches. And that sounds odd, but you can turn in such a way that you don't get a catch. If you use the tool correctly, you should not get a catch. Catches always come from misuse of the tool. You have approached the work from the wrong angle, something of that nature that causes the catch. But we'll talk a little bit about recesses in a second, and that'll probably be as far as we'll go on this video. Okay, now we're going to take a look at a recess. A recess is nothing but a depression cut in the bottom of the bowl blank that's going to go on the outside of the chuck. And because the chuck is on the inside, you expand the chuck jaws to put pressure. Because of the nature of the recess, it's in an expansion mode. So as you put pressure on this recess, if you put too much pressure, you can split out your recess and ruin the bottom of your bowl. So you can't put as much pressure in a recess as you can on a tenon. You can pretty much crank down on a tenon as hard as you want, and it's going to compress the wood, but it's not going to split it. Again, when you're doing a recess, it needs to be the smallest possible diameter. The smallest possible diameter gives you the maximum amount of bearing surface from the chuck jaws into the recess. The more you expand the jaws, the smaller your contact surface is with that recess. So your holding power is not as strong. So just like a tenon, you want to make your recess as small as possible. so you'll have the maximum hold, the maximum contact surface with the chuck jaws, so you have the stronger hold. So it just slides just right over the chuck jaws, and you expand your chuck jaws until you get the hold that you want. You can apply a little pressure, but there is a fine line between putting enough pressure to hold it and putting excess pressure that's going to split it out. And that also has a bearing on how big you make the recess. This recess is about 3/16 of an inch. You can hold on a chuck with as small a recess as about 1/8 of an inch. I've turned a number of things where the recess was only 1/8 of an inch, and it would still hold. But the smaller you make it, the more likely it is to blow out. So you can't put quite as much pressure on it when you clamp it to the chuck. Now, there's not a whole lot I can say about it other than that. Make your recess as small as possible, make it fit the chuck. Now, my particular chuck jaws have a dovetail on the outside. So to make this fit properly, I need to cut a dovetail into this recess so that when I put it on my chuck jaws, they fit correctly. I use a skew to just put a little bit of an angle. If you're into specialty lathe tools, they make a special tool that cuts the dovetail in your recess at the correct angle. I just find it just as easy to cut that angle myself with a skew. So the bottom line is if you make your tenon or your recess fit your chuck, then you're going to be in a better position to keep it from coming off your lathe if you happen to get a catch. It will hold better if it's custom made for your chuck jaws. I hope this information has been helpful. I'm sure there are people out there that's got a different opinion, and that's okay. I'm not saying this is the only way to do it. I'm just saying it's my way. And if somebody else has a different way of doing it, then I encourage you to make a video, put it online, so that we can have more methods to take a look at, and more information to help us make decisions that work best for us. So at any rate, I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed making it, and we'll see you again, hopefully at a meeting soon.